This week, one of the overlooked aspects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the role that Belarus, the dictatorship to the north, plays. So I speak with Margo, a Belarusian pro-democracy activist and TikToker about rigged elections, protests, growing up under a dictator, and how Belarus got here. I'm Lev Gringaus, and welcome to The Jews Are Tired, your podcast about Jewish news. If you like this podcast or Jewfolk generally and the work that we do, support us by buying our merch. We'll be updating our store again soon with new designs, but for now, when you're really fed up with everything, pick up some The Jews Are Tired merch, or celebrate the never-ending exhaustion of being alive with an "Ope, it's Shabbat again" shirt, or just celebrate our emergence from another winter with a The Frozen Chosen mug. The point is, a link to our Teespring store is available in the podcast notes, so go take a look. And there's also a link to donate to Jewfolk in the podcast notes if you want to give directly. We appreciate any support you can give. Okay, Belarus and Margo. First of all, I usually like to refer to guests by their last name in kind of standard journalistic fashion, but being a pro-democracy activist against a dictatorship is a kind of risky business. So for the purposes of this podcast, Margo is just Margarita, or for short, Margo. So Margo was born and raised in Minsk, Belarus for the first 12 years of her life, and in 2012 she moved to the United States with her mom. Now she goes to college in Philadelphia and majors in finance, and when she's not busy with classes, Margo is posting videos about Belarus to her 77,000 followers on TikTok. Over the past month or so, she has also been posting about the war in Ukraine, and in fact, though our conversation is focused on Belarus, she does have family in Ukraine. She also happens to be the first non-Jewish guest, other than Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz, that I've ever had on this podcast. I was interested to talk to Margo after seeing her TikToks reposted on Instagram, actually. I'm definitely one of those people who watches TikToks, but only through Instagram stories, but that's a topic for another time and probably not on this podcast. But I wanted to talk to Margo for a couple of reasons. First of all, many Russian-speaking Jews are from or have connections to Belarus. My dad, for example, is from there, and I've visited the country twice. So I think it's important to understand what is going on there, and Margo's family has been directly involved in pro-democracy protests that were suppressed by Belarus's dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, with Russia's help. That led directly to Belarus being used by Russia as a staging ground for the invasion of Ukraine, and I wanted to unpack that a bit. But also, Margo grew up under oppression, got out, is actively against the dictator in her country and against Belarus's involvement in the invasion of Ukraine, but has faced death threats and a wave of hate against her just because she speaks Russian and just because she's from Belarus. And that's what many Russian-speaking Jews are also facing right now. Businesses and restaurants with Russian or Russia in the name have been harassed across the country, regardless of who their owners actually are. America has this wonderful culture where Americans will start attacking people just because of their perceived ethnicity or nationality whenever there's any sort of remote conflict with a nation that remotely resembles them. For example, German Americans being targeted in World War I, Japanese Americans being targeted in World War II, and Asian Americans facing a massive increase in violent hate crimes since the COVID-19 pandemic started after a lot of incitement in America about China. So basically, Margo's story intersects with a lot of what's going on right now. And how often do I get to interview young TikTok activists? Links to her TikTok and her Instagram handle are in the podcast notes, by the way. Also, in this conversation, you'll hear me say Belarusian when referring to people in or from Belarus, but that's actually not the right way to say that. Margo was way too nice to correct me during the interview, but afterwards she told me it's Belarusian. Just so you know the right way to say that and don't make my mistake. All right, I'll let Margo say the rest. Our conversation has been edited for length and clarity. Enjoy. The first thing I want to ask you, one Russian-speaking Eastern European person to another, is how are you right now, just overall, with everything that's been going on?
Okay, so the first week when the war started, it was definitely a lot harder. I was depressed for a whole week. I couldn't concentrate on anything, not school, not my work, and not even my TikTok that I care about so much. But now it's already been a month and I feel much better, as much as I'm still trying to spread awareness about what's happening in Ukraine, Belarus, as much as I try to repost things to help Ukrainians. I just have to keep up with my work, my school, because I was behind in all of my classes for the first week, but it just can't keep going like that. So I decided that I'm going to kind of put my emotions aside and just be strong, because it's not affecting me as much as it's affecting people that are in Belarus or Ukraine or Russia, obviously. So there's no reason for me to be so sad about it. You know what I mean? So I have to be strong for those people.
So let's back up a moment, because I want to talk about your story. Born and raised in Belarus, and then eventually you came to the US. Can you say a little bit about what was it like growing up under Lukashenko, the dictator slash, I guess, self-named president? And at what point did you start to realize, like, I'm living under a dictatorship, this could end badly?
I only lived in Belarus for 12 years, which sounds like a lot, but I was a kid. So I didn't necessarily understand how bad it was. At the time, I didn't participate in any of the elections, and my parents didn't really share anything with me. I knew, I was aware that our country is poor, and I came from a poor family with a single mother. I had some help from my aunt, my grandparents, but we were basically like a very low income family, and it was tough. But somehow when I was a kid, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the extent to which it was, the situation. So I think I started understanding that Belarus is a very poor country. It's a dictatorship when I came to the United States. And I saw the first election. And my first election was when Trump was elected. It was just almost like shocking to me. I thought to myself, wow, some countries actually have like fair elections and the presidents are actually switching. And then I realized that, wow, Lukashenko's been in power for so long, and that is just so unfair to the people. But honestly, when I lived in Belarus, it was just so normal. I grew up with it. I never saw a president switch. So it was so normal, nothing out of the ordinary. So I didn't understand.
So fast forward to August 2020, you're in the US, of course, and the presidential elections happen in Belarus. Lukashenko claims victory. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the main opposition candidate, calls BS on a rigged election. And by the way, for my American listeners, we're talking about an election that was actually rigged, not what some people think happened in the US. I just have to put that disclaimer in, sorry. But as Tikhanovskaya calls BS, so do many Belarusians. And for the next several months, there are widespread protests and vicious crackdowns by Lukashenko. What was it like for you watching all of this go down? Did you have some, hope that the trajectory of Belarus might change, that Lukashenko and Russian influence might be overthrown? And I also ask that in context of, I know for me and some others, it almost felt like watching Ukraine in 2014 again, casting off Russian influence in the Euromaidan revolution.
Yeah, so for me, the 2020 elections, that was a very tough and emotional time. Before that happened, I kind of felt this hope that Belarus could be a free country, that we could actually have a revolution and, overthrow our government. Before that happened, I didn't even think that I cared, because I already lived in the US. Basically, my favorite person, which is my cousin, she already got into one of the universities in the United States, and she was already moving to live with us very soon, probably like in a year since 2020. So I kind of didn't care. But then when the elections were coming around, I realized that I care about it. And it was definitely a very emotional time for me. I was in my phone 24/7, reading the news, reading what's happening. I was involved. And when Lukashenko actually pronounced himself president, that was so frustrating, because I actually went to Manhattan. It's a 3-hour drive from here. I stood in the line for 10 hours to vote for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya because I felt like even though it's not going to change anything, and I kind of knew that he was going to rig the elections anyway, but I just felt like I have to do it. And my mom did it, and my whole family voted for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. We tried spreading as much information as possible during that time and even now. So it was very frustrating when he still pronounced himself president. And I think he said that it was by like a very high percent. You know, that was obviously BS. Like, we know that you rigged it, but you could have at least lowered your percent because it was not like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like in the like a 60 or 70%. Like that is just not true. That could not happen. And I am personally convinced that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya won the election, but what can you do? I mean, it's a dictatorship. People don't decide anything. But the worst part of the 2020 events is that the protests started. So obviously, it's a good thing that the protests started. And I actually had a lot of hope. I honestly, as naive as I sound right now, I honestly thought that the world was going to help us, that we were going to be noticed, our voices were going to be heard, and we were going to overthrow our government. And then months passed by and the protests kind of didn't stop. They just kept going. First, it was every day. And then in a month, it was like just every weekend. Eventually, the worst thing that could have happened. My cousin, you know, the one I was talking about previously, my favorite person, basically, she's my sister. We grew up together. She's only like 2 years younger than me. And she was kidnapped by the government. She was protesting every day. She was very, very involved. She cared so much about it. And one of the days, she was protesting with her friends, and she was just dragged into a van, like a lot of people did, like maybe thousands of people, treated horribly, basically not given any room, any food, like water, nothing. Luckily, the first time around, she stayed there in the jail. She stayed for less than a day because they didn't have space. But then, like, she got out. And in a couple of weeks, she was arrested again. She was kidnapped again. The same exact thing happened. During that time, she stayed for, I think, also a day or two, which could have been worse. But I think she got away with it because she didn't fight the officers. And she was a 19-year-old girl. So obviously they weren't going to treat her as badly as, a 30-year-old man. So yeah, but it's just horrible that, my closest family member had to go through something like that. And that's when I really started. I mean, I already cared about it very much, but that's when I really started getting mad. I was just angry and I felt useless. I felt like I couldn't do anything about it, and not even no matter the amount of money we have is going to change anything. If she were going to go to jail for years, we weren't going to do anything about it, no matter how many connections, how much money we have. So that's just very scary that you just can't help. You can't do anything about it. I think that's just how any dictatorship works. There's no freedom. It's all just oppression, and you don't have a voice, you don't have any strength, you can't do anything. And the worst thing is that you are constantly scared. And I'm just blessed that I live in the US right now and that my cousin lives with me. So
your cousin was able to get out and is with you in the US right now? Yes,
she was able to get out. She was kidnapped twice in 2020. That was right after the elections happened, probably October, November. But then in the summer, so it was already 2021, she was home and she lives in the city, and some KGB officers came to her apartment. That's when she realized that she needs to run away, now. And thankfully, that was just a crazy coincidence that she already had all of her documents ready to go to the United States. So she didn't waste any more time. After the KGB came to her house, she didn't answer the door. They said that no one's there. So, I mean, they didn't say anything. They just didn't answer the door. But that's when she realized she has to run away. And she did. Literally, maybe 5 days later, she was already out of the country. But the KGB officers, they came because there was some case involving terrorism that actually never happened. That was complete BS. They just made it up and they said that she was a witness, which she wasn't. You know what I mean? So they literally just made up a case. They pronounced her a witness to something, and they just go door to door. You know, in Belarus, it takes a very short period of time for you to go from a witness status to a criminal status, because like today you're a witness, tomorrow you're, you know, involved in the terrorist attack. So that was very concerning, very scary. So that's when we decided that she needs to get out now. And she was going to wait for like another month. But at that point, we did not care. Like, she just left the country.
So it's also interesting because shortly after that, and I believe just sort of looking at on Instagram and TikTok, October 2021 was when you started your account, right?
Yeah.
You know, why then? What made you decide I need to do this publicly now, you know, over a year after the original protests?
So I actually started doing social media in 2020. So around when COVID started, I had a lot of free time. So I started my social media, and I had another page, which was my target audience was actually Russian speaking people from, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, wherever. And I was talking about the US. So, and then it kind of grew into like a lifestyle blog. And I just thought that this is so useless. What I'm doing, what I'm talking about, who cares what I'm eating? Who cares where I'm going when my country is in danger? My country is still oppressed. And I just wanted to, make some change. I wanted to start being useful, at least spread some information. And I was going to start it, in Russian, but then I thought, like, all Russian speaking people already know what's happening in Belarus. The people that don't know is like are Americans, Europeans, anyone, literally anyone else. So I decided to start my TikTok in English. And my target audience now is actually Americans and just English speaking people in general, anyone who is not aware of what's going on. Why did I start so late? I regret starting so late. I wish I had started a long time ago. I wish I'd started right when the protests were happening. But unfortunately, back then, I didn't even think I was going to be an influencer. So yeah, and I think it's, better later than not at all. So,
and what's it been like so far as you sort of grow the account and do more? Because you're doing stuff not just about the situation in Belarus, but I've also seen just cultural Belarusian celebration of stuff. Like what's it like? What's it like now doing it?
I don't think I have too much happy content, and I want to kind of mix it up, but most of my content is telling people stories of, what it's like to live under a dictatorship, spreading awareness about what's happening, what life is like in Belarus. And of course, lately, since the war started, that first week, I did not talk about Belarus and life in Belarus at all. I just talked about the war. I talked about how Belarus is involved in the war. And it was hard to make content and even spread awareness about Belarus when everything just started happening, because it was a very stressful time. So I literally recorded some videos of me just mentally breaking down and crying. And then I deleted them because I was like, what am I doing? So yeah, but also I found that TikTok is a very good coping mechanism for me, because sharing my emotions and my thoughts really helps, especially because I barely get any negative comments. I do get some, but most of the comments that I get are actually supporting me. People, my followers, are supporting me, which I really appreciate. I think that in the future, after this war is over, I'm going to start having more happy content, sharing more about the culture itself, some holiday celebrations, cool, fun traditions that Belarus has, because Belarus has more to offer than just it being a dictatorship. I want people to understand that while it is a dictatorship and it is a problem, we have a very rich and beautiful culture. We are good people, very interesting people. So I definitely want to share that part of Belarus with the world as well. But right now, I am trying to, spread awareness about what's happening there. The real problems that are time sensitive, I would say. I mean, I would keep talking about the protests, and I will. In fact, I already recorded 3 videos, I think, or even more, talking about the protests in 2020, which have gotten more than 1 million views. So I'm going to keep doing that because obviously that is the most important thing that, we tried making a change. We tried fighting, but it just didn't work out because peaceful protests aren't enough. But I also want to share, these little stories about what it's like to live under a dictatorship, my time from school, because most of my memories are from school. And, these just like small things that get affected by the fact that Belarus is very corrupt, how this broken system affects regular people on a daily basis, not just a big picture, but also I share about a big picture as well.
So I also want to, for the listeners, both confirm, having been and traveled in Belarus, both in Minsk and Vitebsk for a little bit. Yes, people there are super nice. I also wanted to say on a tangent, in terms of for the first couple of days of the war, recording videos of yourself, breaking down. The first word that pops into my head is sочувствую. I empathize because I know, for a lot of Russian speakers right now, or at any moment, we're pretty much likely to burst into tears. And I know I've caught myself doing that several times when writing stories about Ukraine. So I just wanted to sort of say I got you. I'm with you with that. But let's also now tie the story of Belarus into Russia's war in Ukraine. Russian troops end up invading Ukraine from Belarus, firing missiles from Belarus. For a while, there was a lot of potential for Belarus to send their own army to help the Russian invasion. And I thought I saw you post a TikTok about, was it your brother or your uncle potentially being enlisted and sent to Ukraine?
So yeah, there was a very high chance that Belarusian army was going to start helping Russian army in Ukraine. So my other cousin, I have 32 plus cousins. But he's my closest one. It's actually the brother of the cousin that got kidnapped. I don't want to say their names because it could be dangerous. But yeah, we're pretty close. We grew up together. All of 3 of us, basically, we all grew up together. All of my other cousins are kind of, a little bit distant. But anyway, yes, there was a chance that he was going to be drafted, and he got a call from the, what is it called? Военкомат.
Oh, the enlistment office?
Yes, he got a call, and they asked him to show up on, I think it was March 1st. And that's around when the war started. And he is in the reserves. He didn't go to the army because going to the army is necessary. You have to go to the army for a year or a year and a half, I think. But he was lucky enough to be in the reserve. You go for less. You go for a month, and then 2 months, and then 3 months at a time. So it's less than half a year in total. He got a call, and we got very scared that why are they calling them now? Why are they drafting them now from the reserve, So I think there was a very high chance, and I think it was very possible that he was going to go to war. We were very, very concerned, scared. And they asked him not to bring his stuff. I'm not sure what that means, but that was not a good sign. So we did everything we could for him not to have to go, basically. And I'm not even going to share how because,
No, definitely for safety and security. I also want to say for the listeners, it's been kind of awesome watching Belarusian anti-war activists, hackers took down train lines to stop the resupply of Russian troops in Belarus. There's been Belarusians fighting in Ukraine for Ukraine against Russia. So I don't want to give the impression that this is just everyone in Belarus is just going to jump on Ukraine. There's a lot going on here in terms of people who are fighting back as well. I do want to ask you, can you say a little bit more, again, if possible, about what's it like talking to your family in Belarus about the war and what's going on?
It's very hard because basically I have some family members from Belarus and Russia who don't understand what's happening. Mainly older generations. All of the younger generations either are on the side of Ukraine and against Lukashenko, and part of the younger generation is just neutral, which I don't know how you can be neutral in politics because you always have to take a side. You can't be telling me that you don't care that you live in a dictatorship. Like, of course you do care. You're just scared or you're lazy to do anything about it. But they like to say they're neutral. But anyway, that's besides the point. The point is that I have some family members, like my grandpa, who, I'm not even kidding, he has Lukashenko's picture on his wall.
Oh, no.
And I don't know what he does with that. But he absolutely loves Lukashenko. He thinks he's the best president in the world. He thinks that he has Putin, around his finger, which is the complete opposite actually in the situation. We all know that Lukashenko is just Putin's puppet and he is highly influenced by Putin's actions. So yeah, but it's just pointless and impossible to talk to my grandpa about this issue. And also, we have another relative. I'm not sure how I'm related to him, but he lives in Russia. He's also around my grandpa's age, and he's also pro-Putin. So it's pointless to kind of talk to them about it. They watch the news, and the government channels are the only sources where they get their information from. And as you may imagine, it's very hard to talk to people like that, especially because they're old and they have their very strong opinions. And especially in Belarus, a whole problem with older people is that they came from the USSR. And when there was this transition from the USSR to democratic Belarus, quote unquote, that was a very good time for them, apparently, because it was more free than during the USSR. But at the same time, it was not nearly as free as it could have been. But they don't know that. For them, it was a huge change. It was this great time. And they all think that Lukashenko saved them. They think that he's some kind of genius who brought them out of this, poverty and oppression. But they don't realize that the fact that we don't change our president, like the presidents don't switch, that's another form of oppression. So yeah, I would say it's very hard to talk to family members like that, and it's pointless to change their opinion. It's impossible. But most of my family members, like a good 90%, are against Lukashenko, against Putin, and 10% are very activist. And, my aunt, my cousins, my closest cousins are all activists. They're all trying to protest, spread information, and they're very active in this whole situation, which I'm very proud of. But I wish more of my family members did that.
I also want to ask you on a really personal note, this is going to sound like maybe a weird question, but I know for a lot of Russian-speaking Jews from Belarus, from Russia, there's a lot of really a deep sense of shame right now to be from those places that are involved in war crimes in Ukraine. I was just sort of curious to ask you, have you sort of felt that or struggled with that at all?
Am I ashamed to speak Russian and to be from Belarus? Absolutely not, because if someone doesn't understand that it is not my fault or our fault that we were born in Belarus under a dictator that just happened to happen, then it's, those people's problems. But have I experienced hate because I speak Russian and I'm from Belarus? Yes. I have gotten countless comments from people and DMs from people that were saying death threats, that were saying that we don't deserve to live, it's our fault, we're not doing enough. And I think the most hurtful comment that I've gotten was, oh, Belarus protested in 2020. Well, you should have done more. And while there's definitely some truth in that, maybe we should have done more, but after having gone through what my family has gone through, it is very hard to receive comments like that, because my family did everything we could. My personal family, we did a lot at the protests, and we're doing a lot right now. I think we're donating and collecting as much money as we can to help. And hearing something like that from complete strangers, oh, you should have done it more. What you did was useless. Oh, look at what Ukraine did in 2014. You should have done the same thing. And it's just it's very easy for some people to say oh, go to war, go die for this cause, when you are not the one that's going. You're not the one that's getting involved. your family is not the one that's going to suffer afterwards. So especially when I know that these people have nothing to do with, Ukraine and Belarus and Russia, they have no idea what it's like. They have no idea what it was like to be raised in a dictatorship and, this constant oppression. You are basically born into this oppression. You don't know anything else unless you travel around the world, which is, by the way, very hard for Belarusians because it's hard to open visas for Belarusian people. Also, Belarusian people are they're poor. It's a very poor country, I think. And most of my friends and most of people that I know weren't able to travel, even if they came from not a very poor family, but like a middle class family from Belarus. They still weren't able to travel and see the world and compare. This comparison is very important.
So the last question I have for you is kind of broad. What's the most maybe important thing you think people, Americans, those outside of Eastern Europe, should know and understand about, Belarus and about the war in Ukraine?
I'm so glad you asked this because I was going to say it anyway. So I think the most important thing that I want people to know is that most Belarusians, I would say 90% of Belarusians are against this war. They're against Lukashenko and they want a change. And they might be scared. They, might feel like nothing's going to change. But I know that most of Belarusians are against this war. They're definitely not pro-Putin, not pro-Lukashenko. So I think that's a very important message that I want to share with the world because I think that a lot of people still think that Belarusians kind of want this war. They want this dictatorship and they don't. They really don't. And I could not stress this enough. Most of the people that I know, except for a couple very extreme cases like my grandpa, most of the people are against Lukashenko. Even if they're saying that they're neutral, they're still against Lukashenko. They're against this war. No one wants this. Nothing good comes out of any war. So I think this is what I want to say. That's the most important message right now.
This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringauz. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and hopefully next week, the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. A link to the transcript of this episode is available in the podcast notes, along with links to any news, stories, or reports referenced for this episode.